Hey guys! Tonight, we're heading into the dry golden expanse of ancient Persia. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, but the stones under your sandals are still warm, almost scalding. The heat here doesn't politely excuse itself when the sun sets. It lingers. It bakes. It seeps into walls and skin and breath. You're standing in the middle of the Persian plateau, somewhere between desert and mountain, where summer temperatures can casually flirt with 45 degrees Celsius. And there's no such thing as air conditioning. Not even a rusty fan. You've never craved a cold drink more. This isn't a place for the faint of heart, or anyone who insists on central cooling. You probably wouldn't survive this barefoot. But somehow the people who lived here thousands of years ago did more than survive. They thrived. They raised families, held poetry contests, made ice cream, and did it all while staying relatively cool. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin walking down a dusty road that cuts through a village framed by arid hills. The sun is gone, but the ground still radiates a low, constant heat, like a memory it refuses to let go of. You pass crumbling adobe walls the color of cinnamon, their tops jagged with centuries of erosion, and see a boy sitting beside a cracked ceramic jar, lazily pouring water into a shallow bowl. As the liquid hits the surface, a bit of it splashes onto his foot, and he sighs, audibly. The coolness is real. Rare. Precious. That's the thing about this place. Every drop of cool is earned. Historians still debate whether the earliest settlers in Persia chose these scorched regions out of necessity or sheer stubbornness. But once they did, they became masters of adaptation. They didn't just fight the heat. They partnered with it, respected it, outsmarted it. Your journey begins in a modest village, somewhere in the shadow of Mount Damavand. The homes here look squat and sturdy, made from sun-dried mud bricks. Nothing flashy. But each wall, each angle, has a quiet logic. The thick clay walls, they hold the coolness in during the day and release it at night, like a natural thermal battery. The flat roofs, designed not for drainage but for stargazing and sleeping under the sky. No part of the house is random. You lean against one such wall, and to your surprise, it's cooler than the air around you. Not cold, but compared to the heat outside, it's like shade in liquid form. A woman nearby is preparing dinner, fanning a low fire beneath a blackened pot. But what grabs your attention is the way her house breathes. Yes, breathes. There's a whisper of wind that curls in through small, strategically placed windows and disappears somewhere into the floor. It's faint, but constant, like the house is exhaling. And it is. Persian builders understood airflow like some people understand music. They knew how to play with currents, create them where none existed, direct them through narrow slits and shadowy corners to make even the hottest afternoons bearable. You step into the doorway and feel a gentle shift. Inside, it's not cold, but it is less hot. And that's the difference between survival and sunstroke. In this space, light filters through latticed screens called mashrabiyah, casting dappled shadows across the tiled floor. A shallow pool sits in the center of the courtyard, not just for decoration, but for function. It cools the air that passes over it. The air smells faintly of rosewater and clay, and for the first time today, you breathe deeply. It's tempting to romanticize this kind of architecture. But don't be fooled. It wasn't luxury. It was logic. Brilliance, born of necessity. When you have no electricity, no fans, no fridges, and your nearest glacier is 200 kilometers away, you make do with clay, geometry, and patience. You wander deeper into the home and notice how rooms are arranged around that central courtyard, like petals around a flower. This inward focus wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about thermal regulation. Shade here isn't a bonus. It's a design feature. Some scholars suggest that the ancient Persians borrowed techniques from Mesopotamian builders. Others argue they developed their own unique style, responding to local conditions in ingenious ways. The truth is, probably both. Cultures don't evolve in straight lines. They twist and borrow, and invent and adapt. As you sit down beside the small pool, a breeze rolls through, not strong but smooth, like a hand brushing your skin. You close your eyes. The water ripples. A nearby chime makes a soft metallic sound. You're not just cooling off. You're part of an ancient rhythm, one that's been swaying for centuries in perfect tempo with the land. And in that moment, you realize something strange. It's not just that the house is cooler, it's that you are. You stay seated by the little courtyard pool a while longer, letting the air and silence wrap around you like linen. Then curiosity tugs at your elbow again. You rise slowly and begin exploring the house, feeling the subtle temperature shifts between rooms, like walking through invisible silk curtains. The floor beneath your feet changes from worn stone to packed earth, then to cool tiles, glazed and slightly uneven. These weren't just for looks. They helped keep the interior cooler by storing nighttime chill and releasing it slowly through the day. Ancient Persian builders didn't wait for the weather to break. They designed their homes to bend the heat without breaking a sweat. The walls here are thick, absurdly thick. You press your palm against one. It's made of mud brick, baked hard under decades of sun, yet still faintly cool. That's the magic of thermal mass. The thicker and denser the wall, the slower it is to heat up, and the longer it holds onto that sweet nighttime chill. Some rooms have tiny windows, no bigger than a stretched hand, and none of them face the sun directly. It's not accidental. These openings are angled to avoid direct sunlight, while still coaxing in a breeze when there is one. You start to notice how every architectural detail is a conversation with the climate. You pass under a curved archway into a deeper part of the home. It's darker here, quieter. The ceiling dips lower and the air stills. But even in the quiet, you hear it, that faint hush, like the house itself is whispering, not creaking. Breathing. Now pay attention to the layout. This isn't just one big box. The rooms are arranged in layers like an onion. The outer ones, biruni, are more public. The inner ones, anderuni, are private, sacred, and often cooler. In a world without digital thermostats, spatial orientation was the thermostat. Historians still argue whether this layout was more about privacy or temperature control. Most likely, it was both. Culture and climate aren't rivals. They collaborate. Out in the courtyard again, you squint at a dome rising over the neighbor's wall. It glows pale in the moonlight, like an egg left out to cool. But it's not just a dome. It's a rooftop fridge. You'll get there soon. First, a walk. The village opens up into narrow alleys, snaking between houses like streams. The alleys are oddly curved and seem to always be in shadow. Some are barely wide enough for two people. But again, this isn't bad planning. It's brilliant heat management. Shade equals survival. You find yourself trailing a barefoot boy carrying a clay jug. The way he cradles it, you'd think it was a baby goat. Turns out, it's water, and not just any water. It's cool. The jug itself is part of the story. It's made from porous clay, the kind that sweats. As water slowly seeps to the surface and evaporates, it takes heat with it. It's called evaporative cooling, and it's as old as it is clever. The water inside stays cooler than the air outside, sometimes by several degrees. No plastic, no compressor, just physics and patience. You see more examples as you wander. Clay jars tucked into shady nooks, woven reed screens soaked in water, hung over doorways, even a few jars buried up to their necks in soil to keep the sun off. You duck into a neighborhood subzine, a small green space, lush with vines and shaded trees. It's not big, But it feels like an oasis. A shallow channel of water gurgles past your feet, fed by something deep and unseen. We'll get to that too. Someone offers you a cup of something herbal and cold. Maybe mint, maybe rose. It's hard to tell, but the shock of cold against your tongue makes your eyes flutter shut. For a second, everything stops. You're just cool. As you lean back against a fig tree, your hand brushes against another clay wall. This one has tiny, almost imperceptible holes drilled into it. Why? Passive ventilation. They allow for just enough airflow to prevent heat buildup without compromising structure or privacy. In modern terms, it's like living inside a breathable thermos. This balance between hard and soft, light and shadow, stillness and breeze, it's everywhere here. You don't find it with electronics or on a thermostat app. You feel it gradually, like slipping into a stream instead of jumping into a pool. One particularly clever trick stands out. In some homes, clay jars filled with water were hung from the ceiling in front of open windows. As the wind passed over them, the moisture cooled the air drifting into the room. The jars would swing slightly, just enough to spread the coolness. You stand in one such room now, and if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the slow drip of condensation. Like time itself ticking more slowly in the cool. And all of this, the bricks, the orientation, the jars, the shadows, is done without a single plug or fan or hum of machinery. Just thoughtful design and stubborn wisdom passed from one generation to the next. You realize something as you stretch your arms in this quiet corner of the world. The heat hasn't disappeared. It never does. But here, it's managed. Redirected, tempered. Not with force, but with flow. Not by fighting nature, but by listening to it. And in a time when we build taller, faster, and noisier, the idea that a few mud bricks and careful angles can rival a power-hungry AC unit? That's a kind of magic worth remembering. You're still in that green space, where the sound of trickling water weaves itself into the silence like silk through fingers. That quiet little stream? It's not a decorative pond or runoff from a distant well. It's the top of a miracle. One you've been walking over without even noticing. Beneath your feet lies one of ancient Persia's greatest engineering marvels, the qanat. You crouch near the edge of the stream and let your hand drift into the shallow flow. The water is cool. Not lukewarm or tolerably tepid. Cool. Almost startling. And here's the kicker. It's been traveling underground for kilometers, sometimes tens of kilometers across the desert, just to gently kiss the toes of a fig tree in a forgotten garden. Qanats are underground aqueducts that tap into mountain water tables and bring liquid life to cities, farms, and villages across Iran, even today. They use only gravity. No pumps, no motors, just slope, patience, and thousands of years of trial and error. Historians still argue whether qanats were invented in Persia during the early 1st millennium BCE, or whether the technology was borrowed from neighboring Mesopotamian or Egyptian civilizations. But here's the truth. No one else perfected them quite like the Persians. You follow the stream backward through the village, curious now. It disappears beneath a carved stone ledge, swallowed by the earth. You imagine what's below, an underground channel, maybe shoulder width, dug by hand through rock and clay. Every 20 or 30 meters, there's a vertical shaft up to the surface, a little air hole, a maintenance portal, a lifeline. From above, they look like a row of wells lined up like beads across the desert. In fact, you spot one now. A circular opening, no wider than a manhole, framed with brick. A child walks past it without a second glance. But to ancient engineers, that hole was everything. It meant alignment, access, water. You lean over it and peer inside. It's dark and impossibly deep. A faint breath of cold air rushes upward, brushing your cheeks like a ghost's sigh. It's like the earth is exhaling. These channels were dug at a precise gradient, just enough slope for water to flow gently downhill without eroding the tunnel. Too steep, and the walls would collapse. Too shallow, and the water would stagnate. The margin for error was thinner than your thumbnail, and they built hundreds. Thousands. One qanat could feed an entire town, supplying water for drinking, cooking, bathing, agriculture, and, yes, cooling. In fact, many homes in hot regions were built near the final mouth of a qanat for this very reason. That gentle stream you touched earlier, it might have been underground for days, never seeing sunlight until it reached the village. You duck into a shady building beside the stream, and your footsteps echo against the tile. Inside, you find a narrow channel running through the center of the floor, water threading its way through the building like a silver ribbon. In some houses, this wasn't just for aesthetics. It was air conditioning. Here's how it worked. Air vents would draw warm outside air downward over the surface of the cool qanat water below, where it was chilled through contact and evaporation. That same air would then rise up into rooms above, cooler, calmer, and somehow more alive. A wind-assisted coolant system with no cords, no noise, no carbon footprint. You sit on a bench beside the stream and rest your head against the wall. It's cold. Properly cold. The air feels 10 degrees cooler than the blazing street you left behind. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, consistent, kind, like the difference between a cold splash and a slow exhale. A local man wanders in, sets down a copper jug, and kneels to refill it. You ask softly how old this qanat is. He shrugs. Maybe 500 years, maybe more. No one really knows. The oldest working ones in Iran today are over 2,500 years old, some even longer. And they still work. Scholars, environmentalists, and architects are starting to pay attention again. In a world where droughts are rising and fresh water is vanishing, the idea of pulling clean, cold water out of the ground using nothing but physics, that's not old-fashioned. That's the future. As you leave the shady chamber, you start to notice qanat systems everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Narrow waterways in gardens, cooling chambers in markets, even irrigation canals carved into the walls of mosques and schools. They form the veins of a civilization that knew how to listen to the land. You take one last look down into a ventilation shaft and wonder how many hands carved that path, how many summers it cooled, how many stories it heard echoing down its length. It's humbling, really. To think that while modern cities bake under concrete and steel, ancient villages in the heart of the desert are still humming with breeze and flowing water, all because someone, somewhere, figured out how to read a mountain and whisper to a slope. And tonight, as you feel the last sigh of cool air rising from the qanat below, you realize you've just met an old friend, an ancient kindness, still at work in the deep, quiet places of the world. You're walking again, slower now, lulled by the hush of qanat water and the sleepy rhythm of desert twilight. But something interrupts the silence, just a soft brushing sound, like fabric against stone. You look up. High above you, something juts out from the roof of a neighboring home, tall, narrow, open to the air. It looks like a chimney, but no smoke rises from it. And then, you feel it. A breeze. It brushes your face unexpectedly, cooler than the air around it, like the touch of a palm dipped in water. You take a step closer. The breeze grows stronger. It's coming from that tower. But how? You've just met the badgir. Windcatchers, they're sometimes called. Though that barely does them justice. These are vertical shafts, built into the rooftops of ancient Persian homes, with openings on multiple sides. They don't just catch wind, they direct it, shape it, whisper it downward like a secret. From the outside, they look like tall watchtowers. Some are simple. 4 open slots facing the cardinal directions. Others are ornate, with arched vents, carved edges, and enough engineering to make a modern HVAC technician raise an eyebrow. The The science is beautifully simple. When wind passes across the top of the tower, it gets funneled down through the shaft. If it meets a current of warm rising air inside the house, the pressure difference creates a vacuum-like pull. The result? Fresh, cool air moving through the rooms below. Effortlessly. Silently. Consistently. You step inside a nearby home to see it for yourself. It's cooler here again, but not in the same way as the Connaught chamber. This is breezier. The air moves, curtains flutter slightly, dust motes drift and spin. You stand directly under the shaft and feel the breeze whispering down onto your head. The homeowner smiles and says something you only half understand, but the meaning is clear. The wind is ours. Historians still argue where the earliest badgirs first appeared. Some point to Yazd, the city of windcatchers, where hundreds of towers still crown the skyline like desert minarets. Others believe the design spread across ancient Egypt, Iraq, and Pakistan in variations suited to local climates. But Persia turned it into an art form. Each badgir was calibrated for its location. Some had vents that could be opened or closed depending on wind direction. Others were designed with internal partitions that cooled the air before it ever reached your nose. The towers didn't just pull air down, they pushed hot air out, a reverse chimney if you will, and sometimes they worked in tandem with canals. Imagine it, hot desert air drawn into a tower, then funneled down past a pool of cold Connaught water before drifting into your bedroom. A passive cooling system, powered by nothing more than the Earth's own rhythms. You run your fingers along the inside wall of the tower. It's smooth and cool. Narrow wooden slats cross the opening above, creating shade and keeping birds out. The entire system requires no electricity, no spinning blades, no whirring fans. It simply works. And it's been working for over 1,000 years. You climb a narrow staircase to the roof. The city stretches around you, bathed in pale moonlight. The rooftops are alive, soft voices, the clink of teacups, a baby's distant cry. And above them all, like sentinels, stand the badgirs. Some are square, others octagonal. A few are crumbling at the edges, but most are still in use, still catching the wind, still sending it where it's needed. You crouch beside one and press your ear to the stone. You expect silence. Instead, you hear wind, moving, twisting, whispering its way downward. It's strangely intimate, like listening to the breath of a sleeping animal. And just when you think you've seen it all, a neighbor's tower surprises you. This one has water trays just inside the shaft. As the air moves over them, moisture evaporates, cooling the wind even more. Some systems even had woven reeds soaked in water placed at the base, adding another layer of chill. It's at this moment you realize these weren't afterthoughts. The windcatchers weren't just nice-to-haves. They were the centerpiece. Everything else in the home worked around them. You imagine waking in the middle of the night to a soft breeze on your face, even when the outside air is still and hot. You imagine a child sleeping soundly under a breeze that's traveled from miles away just to find her cheek. There's poetry in that. And just to drive the point home, you hear a sound behind you, someone lighting a candle. A man climbs to his rooftop with a cup of something steaming, leans against his own windcatcher, and looks out at the stars. He doesn't glance your way. He doesn't need to. He knows the wind is working. And as you breathe in slowly, letting that cool desert breeze slip past your collar and along your arms, you realize you're no longer thinking about how hot it was. The wind has changed everything. The rooftop breeze lingers on your skin as you follow a narrow corridor downward, toes brushing centuries-old stone worn smooth by countless midnight wanderings. Each step steals a little warmth from the soles of your feet, as if the staircase itself is sipping the daytime heat you're eager to forget. A wooden door groans open, and suddenly the air shifts, cool, dense, almost velvety. You've emerged into the house's secret refuge, the Shabistan. It's a vast, vaulted basement chamber, dimly lit by a single pierced bronze lamp hanging from a chain. Shadows bloom like dark umbrellas on the walls. You inhale. The air smells faintly of damp clay, dried rose petals, and something sweet you can't quite place. Possibly last week's saffron sherbet stored in clay pots along the wall. Compared to the rooftop's gentle breeze, this chill feels almost rebellious, like the ground itself is protesting the desert above. Your first instinct is to fold your arms for warmth, an amusing reaction, considering you were sweating 2 minutes ago. The temperature here can hover just above 15 degrees in midsummer, cooler than the inside of many modern fridges. A mainstream fact slips into your mind. Medieval Persian bathhouses often routed surplus cool air from shabastans to lounge areas, creating layered comfort zones long before anyone coined the term climate-controlled spa. You run your fingers across a pillar. It's thick, wider than a tree trunk, and carved with shallow geometric grooves. Those grooves aren't decorative whimsy. They increase surface area, letting the pillars soak up nighttime chill and radiate it back during the day. Overhead, the brick ceiling curves like an upturned boat hull. Arches funnel the cool upward, encouraging slow air circulation, the way a connoisseur might swirl tea to release aroma. It's architectural aromatherapy, minus the candle store soundtrack. A quiet laugh escapes you when you spot a mismatched collection of blankets stacked neatly on a low bench. Thick wool for winter, gauzy cotton for summer, because even a cavern this cool can flirt with the word cold once dawn slides in. Ancient Persian parents supposedly told children the Shabastan was guarded by benevolent spirits who loved silence. Whether that was genuine folklore or just a sly bedtime strategy, you can't tell. But it certainly kept the night chatter to a respectful whisper. Historians still argue whether Shabastans began as storage cellars that gradually morphed into sleeping quarters, or if they originated as communal retreat spaces built right alongside the main house from day one. Either way, by the late Sasanian period, they become a standard feature in affluent homes, mosques, and caravanserais alike. Practicality often masquerades as tradition after all. You wander deeper. On one side, a yawning alcove leads to another staircase descending further, most likely toward the Qanat's water level. Some Shabastans featured a passive cooling trick that would make your modern air conditioner blush. Air shafts from the rooftop windcatcher connect directly to these subrooms, forcing hot air down where it meets the Qanat-chilled stone, then guiding it out through vents halfway up the wall. It's a desert spa treatment, powered by gravity and geometry. The only maintenance required? Keep the shafts clear of curious pigeons and the occasional overconfident gecko. Speaking of animals, a quirky tidbit drifts into local gossip. Villagers insist scorpions refuse to linger in Shabastans because the cold numbs their stingers. You're not eager to test that theory, but it does add a bonus layer of peace of mind while you explore barefoot. Somewhere a lizard skitters across the floor, pauses by a water jar, then decides you're not interesting enough to warrant panic. Fair enough. Along another wall, you notice earthen shelves lined with glazed jars sealed by wax and cloth. These aren't leftovers. They're sherbet syrups. Rose, lemon, sour cherry. Kept cool for late-night guests. A host might pad down at moonrise, ladle a bit of syrup into chilled Qanat water, and serve a drink that could humble any modern soda fountain. One more joke bubbles up. Imagine explaining to a Persian grandmother that you paid $5 for an iced drink containing less flavor than the free stuff she's been brewing since Cyrus the Great. Beneath your footsteps, the floor feels uneven in gentle waves. Intentional, you realize. Slight depressions allow cold air to pool where people sleep, while raised ridges guide heavier, warmer air toward vents. You lie down to test it, pressing one palm against a hollow. It's deliciously cool. A yawn escapes, betrayed by the hush, and you remember the gentle sarcasm of earlier sections. Congratulations, You're voluntarily sprawling across what is essentially a prehistoric cold cellar, and it feels like luxury. In the murmur of the lamp, you pick out faint voices from upstairs, someone laughing, the clink of pottery, the whoosh of a closing door. Sound travels slowly here, as if even noise needs permission to break the calm. You imagine families spreading thin cotton mattresses, mothers swaddling babies, fathers whispering poems. Snoring is inevitable, of course, but Shabistan design helps with that too. The curved ceilings redirect snore echoes upward, sparing neighboring sleepers from full symphonic assault. If only your modern apartment walls did the same, the midnight chainsaw impersonator down the hall might earn fewer dark circle curses. You notice a niche holding a small copper mirror, darkened by years yet still reflective. Perhaps it served a quick grooming check before dawn prayers. Or perhaps someone wanted reassurance that their hair hadn't staged a rebellion during underground slumber. A gentle reminder that vanity can survive any climate. A final visual. Woven reed mats rolled at the ready, embroidered cushions stacked like sleepy soldiers waiting for nightly deployment. Everything is portable, flexible, easy to rearrange, because the Shabistans wasn't just a bedroom. It was a refuge, a conversation hall, a storage vault, and, on more than one scorching afternoon, a playground for children let loose, where the heat couldn't singe their curiosity. Your eyelids grow heavy, buoyed by the steady drip of water echoing through unseen tunnels. The same qanat that watered fig trees above is humming beneath you, a bass line in this architectural lullaby. You smile, remembering the windcatcher on the roof, the qanat under the earth, and realize the Shabistan is the quiet meeting point of all these elements, a cool embrace stitched together by wind, water, and brick. Let the modern world keep its refrigerated aisles and neon ice machines. Down here, you've got the planet doing the cooling for free, and no one's carbon footprint is losing any sleep. From the moment you step outside the Shabistan, blinking at the pale moonlight, you feel the difference. The air above feels heavier now, warmer by comparison. Your skin had grown used to the underground hush, to the comforting chill of stone and shadow. But now, there's a new curiosity drawing you onward, across the courtyard and into another structure. This one more rounded, more alien. It rises like a giant earthen beehive in the middle of the garden. At first, you think it's a storage dome or perhaps a religious relic, but then you see the small arched entrance near the base, half buried in dust, and when you duck inside, your eyes widen at the sensation. It's colder than the Shabistan. Welcome to the Yakchal. The name literally means ice pit, and you're not imagining things. This was a freezer, built before electricity, in the middle of a desert, by people who wore robes and sandals and wrote poetry by oil lamp. You sit down on a flat stone slab inside the dome. The ceiling above curves upward in smooth, narrowing spirals, an upside-down funnel that somehow captures coolness and keeps it trapped. The walls are thick, over 2 meters in some places, made of a material called saruj, a waterproof, mold-resistant mix of clay, sand, lime, goat hair, and ash. That's right, goat hair. Nature's most underappreciated insulator. The interior walls absorb almost no heat. In fact, they reflect it. Everything inside is built to preserve cold, not just avoid heat, but cling to chill like a lover unwilling to say goodbye. You run your hand along the floor, expecting dry earth, and instead find a smooth depression lined with stone. The ice pit itself, deep enough to hold several tons of ice, or preserved food, or both. Here's where things get even weirder. In the most wonderful way. Ice wasn't imported to this dome. It was made here. In winter, water from nearby qanats or wells would be poured into shallow basins just outside the Yakchal. Simple brick-lined pools, barely a few inches deep. Even in desert regions, nighttime temperatures in winter could drop below freezing. The water would freeze overnight into thin sheets. Each morning, workers would gather the ice and carry it inside, stacking it layer by layer into the pit like sheets of glass. Between each layer, they'd add straw for insulation and airflow. After a few weeks of this frozen harvest, the dome would be filled, ready to supply ice and preserved foods for the sweltering summer ahead. No wires, no plugs, no humming compressors, just earth, time, and clever hands. Historians still argue whether the Persians discovered this technique independently or whether it evolved through slow cultural exchange along trade routes. There are whispers of similar methods in ancient China and Afghanistan, but none so architecturally elegant as the Persian yakchal. You lean back and try to imagine summer in the desert, when the air outside could bake flatbread, and travelers would seek shade like animals panting beneath trees. And yet, inside this earthen dome, the ice endured, kept intact for months. Entire communities relied on it, not just for comfort, but for life. It cooled food, soothed fevers, chilled drinks, and preserved herbs. A quirky detail you overhear from a passing elder as you step back outside: some households would save a bit of yakchal ice until midsummer, then use it to make a sorbet-like dessert called falude. Rice noodles, syrup, and rosewater, served icy and fragrant. Imagine being 5 years old, running barefoot across sun-baked bricks, only to be handed a cup of slushy sweetness that had traveled 6 months just to greet your tongue. That's not dessert. That's devotion. And the design? Even the dome's exterior played its part. Painted white to reflect sunlight, curved to minimize surface area exposed to the sun, and vented at the top to release warm air without letting it linger. It's so simple, and yet so profoundly intentional, like someone took a weather problem and solved it with poetry and plaster. You pause by a slanted wall beside the dome. It's casting a long angular shadow across a nearby basin. Another trick. These walls, called barge or ice walls, were placed near the ice pools in such a way that they blocked the low winter sun, ensuring longer freezing hours. No sun, more ice. The logic is flawless. You trace the edge of one such wall with your hand, feeling the coarse brick beneath your fingertips. It's rough yet reassuring, like something that knows its job and has no time for flair. And perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from the yakchal. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't dazzle or gleam. It simply works, quietly, persistently, in absolute harmony with its environment. You glance back one last time before leaving. The dome stands silent, noble, like a sentinel watching over time itself. It holds no flashing lights, no whirring fans, no compressor coils, just layers of cold, sealed in clay and patience. You smile as the breeze picks up again. The ice inside won't notice. It's used to being alone, used to waiting, used to surviving. You walk now with a clearer sense of awe, like someone who's just peeked behind the magician's curtain and found no trickery, only centuries of quiet wisdom. The air outside the yakchal feels noticeably warmer, though not unbearable, thanks to the late-night breeze still flirting with the rooftops. But the next building you approach has a different promise altogether. A heavy wooden door swings open with a sigh, releasing a wave of unexpected warmth, mixed with eucalyptus, rose. There's steam in the air, but somehow it's soothing, not stifling. You've stepped into a hammam, an ancient Persian bathhouse. Here, paradox is the architect. You've come to understand how Persians captured cool in wind towers, chilled entire chambers with underground aqueducts, and froze water in the desert. But now you're in a place of steam, and yet it might just be one of the coolest spots in town, figuratively and sometimes literally. The tile beneath your feet glistens with condensation. Faint echoes bounce between domed ceilings and stone walls as you move deeper inside. Everything is rounded, curved, flowing. No sharp angles here, as if the very building encourages water to glide and air to swirl. At first glance, it feels more like a sauna than a place to cool down, but then you notice how carefully everything is calibrated. The first room is warm but dry. You shed the desert dust, both physically and mentally. The next chamber more humid. Smells of herbs and citrus rinds soaking in a brass basin. A woman ladles warm water over a slab where a guest reclines, eyes closed, arms relaxed at her sides. Another guest lounges on a marble bench with a chilled towel folded across his forehead. He catches your glance and nods as if to say, "Yes, this is exactly where you're supposed to be." What makes this a cooling place is not just the temperatures, but the contrast. In a hot, dry climate, moisture feels luxurious. The slow transition from warm to tepid, from heavy air to breezy hallway, is intentional. The final room, furthest from the furnace, is gently chilled by its proximity to underground water reservoirs. Yes, the qanats again, always threading quietly beneath your feet. Historians still debate how widespread hammams were in private homes versus public spaces, but there's consensus that they played a huge role in both hygiene and hospitality. Cleanliness wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. It was social. Some communities even had set days for women, men, travelers, and children, rotating the use of shared bathhouses like an ancient version of time slot booking. Only with more mint tea and fewer apps. A fringe anecdote floats into your thoughts. In one village, hammam keepers were trained to identify illness by observing a person's skin during scrubbing sessions. Redness, dryness, or patterns of sweat could signal imbalances. Ancient Persian wellness, you might say, was part medical, part musical. The rhythm of water, the melody of breath. You pause near a small pool at the center of the chamber, fed by a thin trickle of qanat water. Its temperature is surprisingly cool. A man nearby splashes his face with it and exhales audibly. You follow suit, and the effect is instant. Your skin tightens, your thoughts slow, your shoulders drop. One of the more delightful quirks of this place? The acoustics. You clap your hands softly and hear the sound stretch upward into the dome, bouncing and melting like smoke. These rounded ceilings weren't just aesthetic. They funneled steam, carried whispers, and minimized echoes, making even a crowded hammam feel intimate. And then there's the bathhouse etiquette. You quickly learn not to speak too loudly, not to rush. Every gesture is slow. Every action has a grace to it. Even the scrubbing, done with rough cloths or gentle clay, follows a rhythm. No harsh movements, no urgency. It's a place where you unwind in the truest sense, unraveling not just tension, but time itself. A local elder, wrapped in a faded cotton robe, sits beside a brass tray of sliced cucumbers and chilled mulberry juice. He motions for you to sit, then explains in few but deliberate words how Persian hammams were not only about cleanliness, they were cultural hubs. Wedding preparations, business deals, matchmaking, even poetry readings happened here. Some hammams even had musicians playing softly in an adjacent room while bathers soaked and sipped herbal drinks. Imagine jazz and steam blending in a limestone lounge. As you walk the outer corridor to cool off, a small breeze greets you. The path is lined with air vents set low along the walls, allowing cooler air from below ground to circulate gently. You wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking for it, but now you've been trained to sense every thermal whisper. You press your back to the wall near one of these vents and close your eyes. You can almost feel the layers of architecture. The hammam above, the air shafts below, the qanat, humming quietly at the earth's heart. You wonder if the building itself dreams. Another visitor walks past, trailing a cloud of steam and orange blossom scent. He's whistling, a soft, contented tune, and you realize something you hadn't yet put into words. Even in the heat, the Persians found a way to cool the soul. And as you dry your hands on a linen cloth, leaving the hammam behind, the dry air outside no longer feels aggressive. It's just another texture now, one you can step into, and step out of, like water. You emerge from the hammam lighter, cleaner, and oddly more aware of your surroundings. The heat hasn't disappeared, but it feels friendlier now, like a well-known rhythm rather than a pounding drum. It's late, but the village doesn't sleep just yet. You glance upward, and there they are again. The rooftops, flat, familiar, and quietly bustling. In this part of the world, they're more than just lids for homes. They're living spaces, carefully designed to cool the body and calm the mind. You step onto one now, climbing a short flight of stairs worn smooth by thousands of footsteps. Up here, everything feels a little lighter. The air moves differently above the buildings. The heat of the day has finally loosened its grip, and a light breeze dances between laundry lines and clay pots. A family across the way is setting up for the night, laying out thin mattresses, shaking out cotton sheets, lighting an oil lamp. Someone's brewed a pot of mint tea, and you can smell the sweetness even from here. You lie back on a worn mat, hands behind your head, gazing up at the infinite dome of stars. There's no ceiling more generous than the night sky in the desert. Mainstream fact? In many ancient Persian towns, rooftops were the preferred place to sleep during the hottest months. Indoors, even with windcatchers and shabastans, could still grow stifling. But up here, the roof absorbed the last breath of wind and released the heat skyward like a prayer. Many families would move upstairs in late spring and not return to sleeping indoors until autumn tapped them on the shoulder. A fringe tidbit you overhear from a nearby conversation. Some folks believed that dreams on rooftops were clearer, freer, even prophetic. Whether that's the altitude or the breeze whispering secrets into your ear, you can't say. But there is something about being up here that changes your thoughts, makes them float. You shift slightly on the mat. Beneath you, the roof is made of packed earth over wooden beams, with a thin layer of plaster to keep it smooth and weather-resistant. It's simple, yes, but it serves another purpose: thermal balance. During the day, the thick material absorbs sunlight. At night, it releases it slowly. That might sound like a recipe for a hotbed, but remember, you've already spent the day cooling everything else. The rooftop is where your body can finally let go of its own stored heat. All around you, life continues in whispers. A father tells a story to his son in the next courtyard. A woman folds linen by lamplight. A group of teenage boys lies side by side, trading jokes under the constellations. Laughter here is softer. Even joy respects the hush. You realize now why these rooftops feel so alive. They're shared spaces. Kitchens might be divided, courtyards private, but up here, lines blur. You can talk to your neighbor without leaving your home. You can pass a cup of tea across a wall. You can listen to a prayer rising from 3 houses away and not feel like an intruder. Historians still discuss whether this kind of rooftop life was unique to Persia or simply a universal desert adaptation. But here, the rooftop wasn't just functional, it was social. It was where people lived and slept. You notice the arrangements: pillows placed away from parapets to avoid night breezes becoming too strong, mosquito nets strung between poles, clay jugs of cool water placed within arm's reach, each sealed with a cloth and stone to keep out dust and dreams. You spot one older man using a traditional fan made from palm leaves, flicking it with casual rhythm while staring into the sky like he's expecting an old friend. He doesn't look down once. Neither do you. The stars seem closer here. You remember reading somewhere that desert skies often offer the clearest views of celestial patterns because there's so little moisture to blur the light. Whether that's true or not, you're not sure. But up here, the Milky Way looks like someone spilled flour across black velvet. You hear the sudden flap of wings, a pair of doves coasting from one roof to another. Birds, too, understand the cool up here. Even cats can be seen, padding silently along the edges. Their silhouettes blending into shadow, pausing only to stretch or blink at you with soft disinterest. A slow breeze passes over your face. You breathe in. There's no traffic, no screens, no low hum of electricity. Just the soft click of pottery, the gentle rustle of linen, and the ever-steady presence of the wind. You're beginning to understand something unspoken here. Cooling in ancient Persia was never just about temperature. It was about designing a life that honored the rhythms of the land, a life that gave you a place to breathe, to rest, to rise slowly. On a rooftop like this, even sleep becomes architecture. Every element, air, earth, water, wind, woven into the structure of your night. And just as your eyes begin to close, a cloud drifts across the moon. The breeze shifts slightly. Somewhere nearby, a lantern is extinguished. The village begins to sleep, and so do you. You awaken gently, not with a jolt or an alarm, but with the slow realization that the sky has changed. The stars have faded, replaced by the softest blue, like indigo steeped in water. A faint bird call breaks the silence. Someone below is grinding grain. Another rooftop dweller rolls up their mat, folds their blanket with one hand while rubbing sleep from their eyes with the other. And now, as you sit up and stretch, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, something else calls to you. A fragrance, something herbal, comforting, and warm. You follow it, down the narrow steps, through a quiet courtyard, and into a shaded veranda where a pot of tea sits steaming beside a bowl of dates. You're not just in someone's home. You've entered the deeper heart of Persian culture. Hospitality, shaped not just by manners, but by architecture. And you're beginning to see how staying cool here is as much about how people relate to each other as how they build their homes. You're offered a seat on a low cushion next to a deep-set wall niche called a tack. Inside, a pitcher of water rests, shaded and slightly chilled thanks to the thick walls. A sprig of mint floats lazily on the surface. No one asks if you want tea. They simply pour it. You're a guest. That's enough. Persian hospitality is famously elaborate, but never forceful. You're given space to breathe, but also layers of comfort, soft light, flowing air, gentle flavors. The environment is curated with care, and much of that comes from the structure of the home itself. You notice how the courtyard is a perfect square, rimmed with trees and trailing vines, centered around a rectangular reflecting pool. This isn't a random arrangement. The garden, bag, was a cornerstone of Persian domestic architecture, both symbolic and practical. Four-part gardens represented harmony between the elements, water, air, earth, and fire, which here might just mean sunlight. And practically, the pool cooled the surrounding space, reflected light into shaded verandas, and watered the nearby citrus and fig trees. A mainstream fact begins to bloom in your thoughts. Persian courtyards were often designed to maximize cross-ventilation. The walls and corridors guided wind through open doors and windows like a careful conductor shaping an invisible symphony. Guests would be seated according to the breeze, some shaded, some slightly sunlit, depending on the season and the time of day. You take a bite of a date, soft and sweet. A cup of tea follows, warm but not boiling, scented with cardamom, and you feel something shift. The heat, once something to be feared, now seems distant, tamed, part of the design. And now the host gestures toward a corner of the courtyard where someone is pulling wet linens across a frame. It's not laundry, it's a cooling curtain. Fringe detail. In especially hot homes, woven mats or thin cotton sheets would be soaked in water and hung across doorways or between pillars. As the breeze passed through them, it picked up moisture and cooled before entering the living space. Think of it as evaporative air conditioning, minus the carbon footprint. The tradition still persists in some villages, proof that simple ideas often outlive complex machines. The host explains, without pretension, that the home has always welcomed guests, travelers, and the occasional stray cat. Cool air, he says, is sweeter when shared. You sip your tea slowly, letting the words settle. You notice how everything, every tile, every angle, contributes to the overall feeling of calm. There's no jarring modern contrast, no loud colors or glaring lights, just texture, shadow, and flow. Historians continue to debate just how much ancient Persian architecture influenced later Islamic, Mughal, and even Andalusian designs. But few deny that the emphasis on coolness and serenity traveled far, crossing deserts, seas, and centuries. You begin to walk again, through winding alleyways that gently curve and narrow, funneling wind in clever ways. Past more courtyards, where children splash their hands in pools, and elders doze under trellises woven with grape leaves. You pass a house where arched niches hold small clay pots of drinking water, placed near entrances not just for family, but for anyone passing by. Hospitality isn't confined to the table, it's built into the architecture. And the houses themselves? No two are the same, yet all carry similar features. High ceilings, thick walls, shaded entrances, and a deep respect for airflow. Even the placement of staircases is considered, not just for aesthetics, but to ensure hot air rises and escapes, rather than settling in living spaces. You notice how verandas are aligned just so, angled to catch breezes while blocking the harshest light. A child naps there now, on a swinging cot that creaks gently as the wind nudges it like a lullaby. You step into a small room filled with cushions, bowls of fruit, and books with yellowed edges. It's cooler here. Not from machines or vents, but because someone knew where to place the window, how to build the wall, when to open the door. That's the genius of it. Persian architecture doesn't dominate the climate, it dances with it. And in this delicate choreography, coolness becomes kindness. And hospitality becomes a form of air, quiet, unseen, but deeply felt. You leave the courtyard with its drifting scents and soft light, stepping once more into the open lanes of the village. The sun is higher now, brighter, bolder. But you've begun to see the heat not as a threat, but as something to negotiate with, like a stubborn neighbor you've learned to befriend. It's in this spirit that you arrive at a small, almost unnoticeable open plaza, where a group of men are gathered around a low table, fanning themselves with palm fronds and sipping something cool. They're not lounging, they're arguing, animated, expressive, gesturing toward buildings and rooftops like architects deep in a puzzle. You step closer and realize they're debating the placement of a windcatcher. This isn't a formal construction site. It's more like a centuries-old ritual. In a community where every home has its own orientation, size, and surroundings, building a windcatcher is part art, part science, and part neighborhood sport. Today's discussion: tower height, vent angle. Number of openings. You're not just in a town, you're in a living laboratory of passive cooling. One elder, perhaps an architect or simply a man who has spent his life reading the wind, draws something in the dust with a stick. A square, a curve, a directional line. If we open here, he says, pointing east, we catch the morning, but the western breeze carries more chill after dusk. Another man nods solemnly. Someone else mutters about roofline interference. It might sound technical, but this is culture. Mainstream historians acknowledge that badgirs, those elegant wind towers, weren't one size fits all. In cities like Yazd, where summers scorched like ovens, homes often had multi-directional towers, sometimes with as many as 8 openings, each one positioned to capture a different wind depending on the season. Some even featured internal vanes or walls, redirecting air to exactly where it was needed most. And that's not all. You soon learn that many towers were connected to domed reservoirs, courtyards, or even underground basins, allowing for adjustments in humidity, airflow, and temperature. Each design was fine-tuned, not just to the local climate, but to the specific needs of the family living below. One fringe anecdote you overhear, told half in jest, half in truth, is about a builder who allegedly refused to construct a windcatcher for his neighbor unless he was allowed to sit in their home for one full summer. The idea? You can't guide air unless you felt how it lives in a place. The debate around the table intensifies. A young man suggests a narrower shaft for faster flow. An older voice counters with a reminder. Faster isn't always better. Cool air like good tea needs time to steep. You almost laugh, but it's too poetic to mock. You begin to see the subtle differences between towers as you walk through the neighborhood. Some are tall and slender, rising above the roof like watchful eyes. Others are wider, squatter with ornate wooden slats for filtering dust and guiding airflow. A few are intricately carved, clearly the work of someone with a soft spot for decoration. But even the plainest towers hum with quiet dignity. They work. That's what matters. And it isn't just homes. You pass a mosque with a tower of its own, cooling not just prayer spaces, but the underground cistern where ritual ablutions are performed. A bazaar, too, boasts a row of small vents near the ceiling, catching breeze and guiding it between spice jars and silk rolls. The logic is the same. Air wants to move. You just have to listen. You turn a corner and find yourself standing before a school, its stone steps worn thin in the center from generations of sandaled feet. Even here, the principles hold. Narrow windows high on the walls, vents near the floor. A small badgir tucked to one side, barely taller than a man. Inside, children recite poetry beside a shallow basin, its surface trembling with reflected sunlight. Historians still argue whether these structures should be called primitive air conditioners or climate wisdom. But the villagers don't care. They just know what works. And now, so do you. You stand still for a moment, letting the wind wash over you. Not dramatic, not gusty, but insistent. It slips beneath your collar, around your wrists, into the folds of your robe. It's not just air anymore. It's evidence of something considered, something crafted, something earned. The old man at the table waves you over and offers a cup of something tart and cool, maybe kakshir, a local seed drink often chilled in earthenware and stirred with crushed ice from a neighbor's yakchal. You drink. The breeze tugs at your hair. And the conversation shifts. Now they're discussing shade angles. Whether vines or mud overhangs provide better coverage. Someone mentions a long-dead uncle who built his windcatcher one brick too far left and had to live with a tepid living room until the day he died. You smile, because this care, this detail, this centuries-long conversation between people and climate isn't a relic. It's a legacy. You leave the cluster of debaters behind, the echo of their wind whispers fading as you stroll along a quiet, sun-drenched wall. The conversation clings to you, not in sound, but in sensation. It was more than just bricks and vents. It was about philosophy, a way of seeing the world where comfort isn't forced into being, but gently invited. And now you can't help but compare. Around the corner, tucked beneath the shelter of a date palm, you find a small workshop, a modern one, with a dusty air conditioning unit humming quietly on the wall. Its cord trails into a cracked concrete socket. Nearby, a plastic water jug sweats on a flimsy metal table. Someone has placed a potted plant next to it, maybe in an attempt to soften the scene. But you can feel the difference immediately. There's cool air, yes, but it's dry, mechanical, insistent. It doesn't swirl, it pushes. The room feels divided. One corner freezing, the other stuffy. You step out again almost reflexively, as though the breeze outside might forgive the interruption. This isn't a critique, just a contrast. The modern world has given us power and predictability. With electricity, you can override nature. At the touch of a button, you decide how cold a room should be, how quickly it gets there, and for how long it stays. And yet, you start to wonder, what does it cost to force comfort? Not just in watts or dollars, but in experience? In ancient Persia, comfort was an interaction between structure and sky, between season and soul. Cooling wasn't a binary switch. It was a dance, sometimes slower than you'd like, sometimes imperfect, but always a collaboration. You pause beneath a shaded archway and feel the two worlds pressing against each other. One hums with compressors, ducts, timers, and sealed windows. The other hums with wind, with time, with tuned intuition. A mainstream fact settles into your thoughts. Air conditioners account for about 20% of global electricity use in buildings. And as temperatures rise worldwide, that number will grow. Entire cities are becoming thermal battlegrounds, locked in a costly struggle to cool interiors while warming the outside. Meanwhile, in Yazd, still beating beneath desert skies, centuries-old badgirs are still in use, and they use no electricity at all. Fringe designers and green architects are starting to notice. Some have begun borrowing ancient Persian techniques, merging them with modern materials. You may have seen them without realizing. Buildings shaped like inverted cones, with high vents, hollow floors, and solar chimneys. Others experiment with thermal mass walls, thick earthen surfaces that absorb heat during the day and radiate it out at night, just like the Shabastans and rooftops you've now come to cherish. There's even a term for this revival, passive cooling. But in Persia, there was nothing passive about it. It was a living craft, actively passed down, debated, and adapted to every new home, every turn of the wind. You walk now through a neighborhood on the edge of the village, where newer homes blend old forms with updated materials. One house has solar panels on its roof, just above a clay badgir. Another has a concrete frame but still features a central courtyard, a shaded veranda, and strategically placed windows with sheer white curtains dancing in the breeze. It's not a rejection of modernity. It's an integration. A woman in a long linen dress opens a small wooden door to let in the morning light. You see a reed mat hung across the entrance, soaked with cool water, its fibers glistening in the sunlight. She waves at a neighbor. They exchange something, maybe fruit, maybe news, maybe both, and the air continues to move. You notice now that airflow isn't just about physics here. It's a metaphor for connection, for awareness, for living in rhythm with something bigger than yourself. A child passes you with a homemade paper fan, swinging it lazily as she hums. Behind her, her grandfather adjusts the slats on a rooftop vent, not out of necessity, but because he's done it every summer since he was small. It's a ritual, a habit of respecting the elements, not controlling them. Historians may not agree on whether these techniques will scale in cities of steel and glass, but the villagers don't argue about scale. They argue about shade angles and the right height for a tower and how best to honor the breeze. You return to your rooftop that night. Yes, the same one, the same mat, the same stars. But something is different now. You understand. The real coolness wasn't in the walls, or the domes, or the qanats. It was in the relationship between human need and natural law, between design and restraint, between what you could force and what you were willing to learn from. And as you lie there, a warm cup of tea beside you, a cloth folded beneath your head, and the faint rustle of wind dancing through the badgir behind you, you think, maybe comfort isn't something you buy. Maybe it's something you earn by listening to the air. You wake just before dawn again, not to an alarm, not to urgency, but to silence so complete it becomes its own sound. A single dove flutters across the pinkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a slow wooden cart creaks over cobblestones. And with that, your thoughts drift outward, beyond this village, this courtyard, this rooftop. Because Persia's cool-breathing wisdom didn't stay rooted here forever. You pull on your sandals and wander to the edge of the village, where the view opens wide. Mountains to one side, sand to the other, and somewhere in between, a faint whisper of green. This is where caravans once passed, where camels knelt in dust, where stories and technologies began to travel. And it's here that you begin to follow the trail westward, down through Iraq, into Syria and Egypt, across the Mediterranean, into Al-Andalus, medieval Islamic Spain. Along the way, windcatchers became towers, courtyards became patios, and yakchals transformed into subterranean cisterns. Ideas reshaped themselves just like airflow through stone. In Cordoba, for example, you might walk into a shaded courtyard, its walls thick, its tiles glazed, a fountain trickling at the center, and feel that same hush you felt beneath the badgir. Moorish architects absorbed Persian design into their bones, and then over time, it made its way into Renaissance villas, and from there, into the foundations of modern climate design. Historians still debate exactly how and when the knowledge moved. Was it through merchant caravans? Scholarly exchanges in Baghdad? Soldiers returning from campaigns? Likely all of it. Ideas like wind don't travel in straight lines. They curl. They pause. They surprise you. But wherever Persian cooling principles went, they left fingerprints. In Timbuktu, Malian scholars built libraries with high vents and deep eaves. In Fez, Moroccan riads bloomed with shaded patios and latticework windows that teased breeze into reading rooms. Even in Venice, traces of evaporative cooling through water channels can be found in older structures. And then, far across the seas, Persian influence met bamboo and rice paper. In China, in Japan, the idea of building in harmony with the elements wasn't just common, it was sacred. Entire homes were lifted off the ground to allow air to pass beneath. Walls slid open to let breezes wander. A fringe example? Some traditional Javanese homes incorporated breathable roof structures, woven palm or clay that didn't fully seal, letting hot air rise and drift out even as the rain stayed politely above. No fans. No filters, just trust in the process. You continue walking, imagining yourself in each place. You feel the sweat of a builder in Granada, chiseling vented lattice from white limestone. You see a mother in Cairo dipping her linen screen in well water at dusk. You picture a young architect in 21st century Dubai sketching a modern tower, and then scribbling in a little arrow marked passive airflow intake. Unsure where the idea came from, but knowing it matters. Modern eco-architecture has a name for this revival: bioclimatic design. You've seen it in green hotels, experimental schools, desert resorts. They borrow from the past, not as a trend, but as a quiet confession. The old ways might have been wiser. A mainstream fact flickers in. In 2016, the World Green Building Council cited traditional Persian windcatcher techniques as a model for zero-energy cooling in arid zones. We've built machines that can mimic nature, but now we're circling back to build with it instead. And you smile, because this isn't a nostalgia trip, it's a loop. The breeze at your back today may have once brushed the cheek of a poet in Shiraz, cooled the ink on a manuscript in Damascus, or carried the scent of orange blossoms through a window in Seville. Air remembers. You pause beneath an old almond tree on the outskirts of the village. Its leaves quiver slightly in a breeze you hadn't noticed. Above, a stork shifts its weight on a mud brick chimney. The scene is motionless, but alive, just like the legacy. Because Persian cooling wasn't just about comfort, it was a worldview. A belief that nature didn't need to be conquered. It needed to be coaxed gently through geometry and patience and care. And now, centuries later, you've walked that path, felt the bricks, heard the silence, followed the wind, from the cool depths of Shabistan to the star-washed rooftops of Yazd, and now to the outer edges of memory itself. But the trail isn't ending. It's just reaching your door. You turn back toward the village, but not to retrace your steps. This time your path leads toward the forgotten, toward places where the air has stilled, not by design, but by abandonment. The sun is climbing now, mellow and golden, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. A narrow track leads you to the edge of an old settlement, one buried by sand, one swallowed by time. Walls lean awkwardly here. Windcatchers stand like broken sails, once elegant, now toothless against the sky. But even in ruin, the architecture tells its story. You step into what was once a home. The bricks whisper, the angles still speak. A dry basin, long emptied of Kanat water, stretches across the floor like a scar. Here cooling wasn't just about function, it was identity. And losing it meant losing more than comfort. It meant losing connection. The Persian plateau is dotted with places like this. Abandoned villages where kanats dried up, where roof repairs ceased, where wind towers crumbled after generations of no hands climbing them. Whether due to war, shifting trade routes, or climate change, these homes were left behind, and the cool air left with them. You walk into a shabistan, its ceiling partially collapsed. Sunlight filters through in uneven beams. The floor is cracked, but the temperature still drops a few degrees as you step inside. It's faint, but it's there. Even in ruin, the principles hold. A mainstream fact surfaces. Iran has over 30,000 kanats, and nearly 20% of them are no longer functional. Some dried naturally. Others collapsed due to lack of upkeep. Many were simply replaced by electric pumps, cheaper, faster, more aggressive, but also noisier, hungrier. The shift wasn't always intentional. As modern cities grew, old systems were deemed inefficient. Homes were wired, ducted, insulated with foreign materials, and for a time it felt like progress. But nature keeps the receipts. A fringe tale you hear from an old man sitting under a fig tree. In his youth, he says, the village elders warned that if a kanat went dry, so would the soul of the town. He chuckles at his own superstition, then glances sideways at the collapsed windcatcher nearby and says, but maybe they weren't wrong. You feel that truth, because something happens as you stand in these ruins. You stop seeing failure. You start seeing layers, not just of architecture, but of time. The way knowledge curls into the cracks, the way silence fills the domes, the way even a broken badgir still lifts your gaze skyward. You reach what was once a courtyard. The pool is gone, filled with dust and small stones, but the shape remains. And around its edges? Green. Tiny shoots of grass, a fig sapling, a stubborn pomegranate tree whose roots still seek the ghost of water beneath. Nature remembers design that served it well. And here's the most remarkable part. In some of these ghost villages, people are returning, not in waves, but in trickles. Architects, environmentalists, children of migrants. They come with notebooks and memory. They come with a question. What if this still works? Some have already begun restoring badgirs, redigging kanat shafts, rebuilding domes with sarouj, not as museums, but as homes, as testaments. As proof that cooling isn't just a commodity, it's a dialogue between the earth and the builder. You sit in the shade of one half-standing wall and imagine the voices that once lived here. A child asking if the breeze will come tonight. A father adjusting the roof mats. A mother pressing her hand to a cooled clay jar and smiling. They're gone now. But the wind they coaxed still moves through these spaces, like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Historians often focus on the rise and fall of cities. But architecture whispers another story, not of collapse, but of pause. A place left waiting for someone to listen again. And now you rise, not with sadness, but with reverence. Because you've walked the kanats, you've stood beneath the towers, you've tasted the tea, felt the chill, watched the stars from the rooftops. You followed the wind back through centuries. And in the quiet heart of a village once lost, you've heard something else. Not an ending, but a breath waiting to begin again. You leave the silent ruins behind, stepping back onto a path warmed by the mid-morning sun. The village is awake now, fully. But instead of retreating from the heat, you see how the people move with it. Slowly, intentionally, never rushing unless the shadows allow. And it dawns on you, despite all the ingenuity, all the wind towers and qanats and clever insulation, life here was still hot. Coolth, as some architects call it, was never absolute. It was relative. It was sought after like a blessing, preserved like a ritual, but not guaranteed. And that's where the final myth falls away. You make your way into a bustling little market street, the air filled with the scent of dried limes, warm bread, and cumin. It's shaded by slatted wood overhead, Tabestane style, which filters light into narrow golden beams. Still warm, yes, but not blinding. And it's in this warm air, beneath the filtered sun, that you begin to grasp the truth about ancient comfort. It was never about complete escape. It was about endurance. And more than that, it was about grace. A mainstream reality. Ancient Persians weren't gliding around in linen robes with constant breezes tickling their ankles, like something out of a modern spa ad. Most people, especially the poor, didn't have access to full systems of qanats or shabastans. Some homes had only a single vent. Some had no dome, just thatched cover and hope for a breeze. But what they did have was rhythm. They woke early, slept through midday, worked in courtyards, cooked outside, bathed often, drank water slowly, stopped when it got too hot, listened to the land, and in that way, they cooled themselves with habits, not just walls. You pass a young boy refilling clay water jugs from a qanat-fed trough. He dips a ladle into the jar and sips. Not because he's thirsty, but because that's what you do. Small sips all day, never letting the heat sneak up on you. Nearby, a woman fans dough over a hot griddle. She doesn't swat the heat away. She leans into it, knowing she'll retreat to the shaded room behind her soon enough. The bread will cool on a stone shelf inside a thick-walled room, its temperature a few degrees below the courtyards. She'll nap, so will the dog curled beside her. You notice now how every behavior here is cooling. Children dart in and out of water mists. A merchant's scales are shaded by a rag of cloth soaked in rosewater. A copper bowl of fruit rests half submerged in a shallow channel of qanat runoff. Even the cats know where to lie. Beneath the overhanging lip of a windcatcher's shadow, where air pools in lazy circles. A quirky local belief you overhear. When a home grows too hot, it's not because of the sun. It's because the wind spirits have grown tired of being ignored. So you open a window, pour a bowl of water, light incense. Not to cool the room, but to remind yourself to slow down. Historians often chase the how. How did they build this? Cool that? Survive this heat? But here, as you sip another glass of chilled tokme sharbati, basil seed drink, the more relevant question emerges. How did they choose to live with the heat? Not conquer it, not fear it, but coexist with it day after day for centuries. You head down another lane, narrow and lined with walls so tall and close they nearly kiss overhead. A breeze snakes through, brushing your shoulders. The walls are not pretty, just mud brick and old wood, but you realize now they're not trying to impress you, they're trying to serve you. Every curve, every shadow, every decision in this built environment whispers the same truth. You are not separate from the climate. You are part of it. You step into a quiet room at the end of the street. It's nothing grand, just a small prayer room, tiled in blue and green, with a thin carpet rolled near the window. But it's cooler than you expected. There's no windcatcher, no water basin, just perfect orientation. A single window catches morning light and channels it gently across the floor. The wall behind you is thick, west-facing, and keeps the afternoon at bay. It's subtle. So subtle that most would miss it, but not you, not anymore. You sit for a while, not praying necessarily, just resting, letting the quiet tuck around you. watching the curtain move slightly with the invisible breath of air from the courtyard beyond. And you think, maybe this was the secret all along, not to build a fortress against the sun, but to build a friendship with it. The day moves onward. By now, you've wandered through rooftops, shabastans, hammams, courtyards, and the hollow bones of villages long surrendered to sand. You've chased the wind and listened to its voice in domes, vents, and walls. But before this journey rests, there's one last place to visit, one where the old and the new breathe side by side. You arrive at the edge of the city, not the ancient city, not Yazd of wind towers and mud brick. This is modern Yazd, or maybe Kashan, or perhaps some other corner of contemporary Iran where glass meets adobe and solar panels wink at badgirs like old friends reuniting after a long silence. A hotel rises here, elegant, minimal, cooled, of course, but not just with machines. Its very shape bows to the desert's rhythms, and more importantly, it borrows from the ancestors. You step through a doorway lined with carved wooden slats, designed not to impress, but to filter the light. The floor is made of locally sourced stone, naturally cool to the touch. The receptionist offers you a drink, not from a fridge, but poured from a clay kuze, sweating slightly, keeping itself cold through gentle evaporation. A centuries-old technique, right here in a lobby with Wi-Fi. It's a reminder. The past isn't behind us, it's beneath us, built into the walls, the angles, the air. A mainstream fact plays in your mind. Many architects in hot, dry regions, like parts of California, Australia, North Africa, are now re-embracing passive cooling, not as novelty, but necessity. With energy grids strained and climates shifting, the world is looking backward. To move forward, you're taken on a brief tour. Your guide, a young woman in a linen blouse and wide-brimmed hat, points to each feature with quiet pride. That wall, she says, is made from rammed earth, just like my grandfather's house. She taps the edge of a shallow pool. This water doesn't just look nice. It chills the air that passes above it before reaching the guest rooms. The guest rooms themselves? Not sealed boxes with roaring vents, but breathing spaces. High ceilings, narrow windows placed precisely to catch cross breezes. No curtains, just wooden screens that shift with the light and let shadows dance across the tiles in cooling waves. Even the bedding is local cotton, light, airy, designed to breathe. It's a strange thing, you realize, as you sit down on a rooftop terrace beside a long planter of fragrant herbs, that the modern hotel is more ancient than some newer homes. And you wonder, maybe this isn't going back. Maybe this is continuing. A thread that never really broke, just frayed for a while. You sip your tea and stare out across the city. Some buildings still hum with air conditioning units, grumbling through the heat. But others stand quietly, their windcatchers tall, their walls thick, their windows half-shuttered. There's a balance here, an understanding that technology is not the enemy, but nor is it the master. And now for the first time you feel ready to leave, because you've walked the full arc, from the old wisdom, through forgotten ruins, into the present revival. And what remains is not a timeline, it's a continuum. As you descend the rooftop steps for the last time, you pass a gardener tending to a patch of shade-grown herbs. He nods at you, says nothing. But the air that moves between you carries a shared understanding that staying cool in ancient Persia was never just about surviving the summer. It was about how you lived inside the world, not above it, and maybe how you still can. Wind down, 300 words. Let the sounds around you soften now. Imagine again that slow desert breeze, the one that climbed through towers and danced across still water. Let it wrap around your arms and shoulders, gentle and weightless, like linen drying on a line. You're lying back on that flat rooftop once more. The stars have returned. The air is calm, not cold, not hot, just right. balanced, earned. In the stillness you hear it again. The quiet hum beneath all things, water trickling through stone tunnels, the wind slipping over clay walls, the hush of night settling over a village that has outlived empires. There's peace in knowing the world once moved like this, and maybe still can. No clicks, no blinking lights. Just the wisdom of design shaped by sun and silence. Spaces that hold you, rather than fight the air around you. Let your breath match the rhythm of the night. Slow, deeper now, and slower still. And as your thoughts begin to drift like those rooftop curtains, loose and easy in the breeze, carry this with you. That comfort doesn't always have to come from effort. Sometimes it comes from listening, from stillness, from the wind itself. Good night.